In today's gym culture, it feels like few lifters care about being strong anymore. I get it. You don't want to be a powerlifter. You're seeing the mistakes that I and the rest of Noble Natties made, overemphasizing strength training methods, neglecting key muscles, and treating bodybuilding like it's just accessory work. I understand more than anyone that you don't want to be benching 3 plates with 16-inch arms, only to have others say, "Wow, you're a lot stronger than you look." It's not a compliment when your primary goal is hypertrophy. Your strength can definitely be disproportionate, with others having bigger physiques than you while you crush them on big lifts. I've seen many guys deadlift 6 plates without having impressive legs or lats. And for the upper body, it's the torso-dominant epidemic. Usually big pecs, thick upper back, but small delts and arms. This all stems from minimalist novice programs that established habits that were difficult to break later in our training journey, until the flaws became too great to ignore. We learned this the hard way. The idea that bodybuilders only look good because of drugs and genetics, not training, began to make less sense. We initially dismissed natural bodybuilders without examining their methods, which were far different from those used by strength athletes. The emphasis on specificity of training among the big 3 was the X factor, treating hypertrophy as a temporary phase. Hypertrophy blocks lasting only a few months should have instantly been identified as absolute lunacy from a bodybuilding perspective. They should last for years. So the pure strength athlete's approach was to build adequate muscle associated with the competition movements, focusing on training movements, not muscles. This often meant staying within a weight class unless maxed out, with gaining more size as a last resort after already getting very strong. But if you followed that advice, many years were already wasted and frustration ensued. For example, many 181-pound powerlifters won't bulk up to the 200s because that would exceed their weight class. Competing in multiple meets a year, they mix higher frequency with high specificity while avoiding accessories that don't offer the best carryover. They aim to get the most out of their current engine before warranting an upgrade. This approach even led to eliminating excellent exercises that have high strength potential and improve aesthetics, such as lateral raises, any triceps long head work, or doing curls half-heartedly, because these exercises don't necessarily help the big 3. And one of the worst offenders is the idea of not overhead pressing because it doesn't have the best carryover to the bench press, particularly if using a high arch with a super wide grip. As you can see, this hyper-specific big mover mindset creates unbalanced physiques that would not place well in natural bodybuilding. This mindset was so prevalent that it caused many of us to be frustrated with our lack of results on certain muscles. We were told that elite strength charts would naturally dictate our appropriate size, but this development might not be proportional or satisfactory for bodybuilding goals. That's what powerlifters don't understand. Their idea of jacked is settling for us, even if it's still a better physique than most will ever have. But knowing that we could be bigger is enough of a reason to complain, even if it's only 10 to 20% more lean tissue. That's precisely what we fight for, as Natural Hypertrophy has beautifully stated. Just to say, OGs will remember that years ago, many haters claimed I had hit my genetic arm limit at 16 inches, but I've gained over an inch since then. Back then, I was influenced to get stronger at chin-ups to grow bigger biceps, but even when I hit 4 plates for the first time, my arms stayed the same size. I was also told that a combination with a 365 close grip bench would guarantee gains. Yet when I surpassed it with a 380 close grip bench, imagine how heavy that is, my arms are only 16.5 inches. And I was much heavier. That's not normal. No one will tell me that it is. But I was crazy enough to try this extreme approach that apparently was foolproof, yet it failed miserably. It's in the extreme experiences where you discover faulty training. That's why studies showing high biceps EMG activation from chin-ups or better results from curls are nonsense. It's always on beginners, never elite naturals who tried that minimalist approach and failed miserably. Compare that to my recent results. I got shredded single-digit body fat, only 155 with 16-inch arms. And during my bulk with less body fat than years ago, they were 17.25 inches. Yet, my compound strength on presses and pulls is only a tad bit stronger, but my isolation strength is night and day transformed, like going from 40-pound dumbbell extensions per hand to 60 pounds. Also know that a new PR is always just a peek away, just that it need not be specific to compounds at all times. So my hypertrophy block was technically 2.5 years. And I'll be proving that soon. Just you wait. That's what hypertrophy only bros don't realize. A bigger muscle is a stronger muscle. The greater the cross-sectional area, the more force potential. So I focus on what mattered. Isolation strength for the long head of the triceps via various extensions, and heavy basic curls for my biceps. And it's worked better than the unfeasible, risky advice that you might not even reach, by the way. It's like only the genetically gifted are proudly showing their results, while everyone else ends up in the gutter. You don't hear those stories because those guys aren't making videos. They've given up, succumbing to the black pill. Occasionally, you'll find crazy lifters like me who document everything and never give up, including basement bodybuilding. He had the same arm size as me for a long time since he fell into the same trap. But after learning about proper hypertrophy training and getting stronger on the right lifts, he's now up to 18 inches. How did he do that when I outpress him? Well, if you're doing preacher curls with 120 for reps and JM presses with 2 plates for reps, what do you think will happen? I can't touch those numbers, but I can dip more, bench more, and overhead press more. But it's irrelevant because I'm dominated by the primary movers. That's what bloats up the numbers, which becomes apparent when you look at my lats, chest, and delts. Then there's Jeffrey Verity Schofield. Inexperienced lifters clown on him for being weak, yet he's practically maxed out the dumbbells on incline presses, lifting similarly to me. And he can Larson press 2 plates for reps. Strength is not just assessed by the competition bench press. There are other free weight exercises that have established standards and stood the test of time. Plus, his triceps isolation strength surpasses mine on every level. What he does for reps, to this day, I can't even budge for 1 rep. My long head strength is nowhere near his level. So he's far from weak, and it shows. His long head is the freakiest out of all of us. For biceps, before this year, he was out curling me by 10 to 15 pounds on most dumbbell variations. That's huge. Yet, I could pull more on compounds where the back is the primary mover and the biceps aid secondarily. Wow. Is that really so surprising? The truth is, certain muscles, most notably of the limbs, require isolation. And it all makes sense. Presses work the lateral and medial head, creating the horseshoe shape near the elbow and middle of the arm. My development is on point there, but that's literally what you'd expect from compound movements. No one ever said it was inadequate for that purpose, but that's not what's going to make your arms look massive. And even though your elbow flexors are involved in rows and vertical pulls, it's not helping you lift hundreds of pounds. Your biceps are not that strong. They're super far from failure and only help a bit. You could even have biceps tendonitis, I would know, and still pull heavy, proving how laughable their involvement truly is. Heck, even Bald Omni-Man built a respectable physique by late 2021, but got significantly bigger when he started focusing on his arms with Johnny bodybuilder training. He admits this. Overall, the consensus is mutual. This will save a lot of time for the future generation of lifters. With that said, some viewers have now taken a turn for the worse by ignoring our foundational growth on the muscles that did respond well, and especially general strength goals. This was not our intention. The problem was the hyperfixation on powerlifting, not strength training, which has given birth to the term hypertrophy cell. And even though it's mean-spirited, it's incredibly accurate. I couldn't agree more. The pendulum has swung the other way. Guys say they want to get bigger, but don't care about getting stronger at all. They want the size without the performance. Whereas powerlifters often say, oh, I don't care about size. If I'm bigger, that's helpful as a side effect to improve my total, but I want to be stronger first and foremost. I don't care about the looks. See, you got totally opposite goals here. But out of the two, I think the hypertrophy-only approach is worse. Genuine question. Why would you want to be jacked, yet weak? Honestly, I think guys use this to justify their poor numbers. Like, I'm not a powerlifter. I don't care at all about that sport or who the top competitors are. Nor do I ever want to look like any of them. But guess what? I do care about my strength. I find it demoralizing to lift significantly lighter weights for the sake of pure size. knowing my gains can be just as good with a balanced approach. I can get the best of both worlds because even when we talk about rep ranges, reps of 5 are perfectly adequate for size. You could even argue it's even better due to less central fatigue. So if you're not even doing that, if that's considered heavy work for you, like bros used to call 5x5 strength training, it's not, by the way, it was created by Bodybuilders in the Silver Era by Reg Park, and you don't care because higher reps should equal gains on paper, then you've missed the plot. Especially on movements that have low skill demands. If anything, your training is more inefficient. And as Natural Hypertrophy recently said, this dulls hypertrophy training. It's to the point where guys say any exercise with a stability element, especially calisthenics based, or that which involves your core, is not optimal. But you can build internal stability to perform all these movements with flawless form for the rest of your life. And it doesn't take that long to develop. You can even get your presses so proficient that it looks like you green screened out a Smith machine. I've reached that point. Vertical bar path, changing the rate of speed at any moment and pausing in synchronicity without having weird sticking points or losing control. You learn to work with the bar of freedom. And I argue this can even help with injury prevention, but it's not particularly skillful to do so. And going back to the big three, I want people to understand that they aren't overly technical lifts. Powerlifting is one of the truest tests of strength on fundamental patterns. A major press, a hip hinge, and a squat. It's not perfect, and I'll be the first to acknowledge that strict overhead pressing strength, dipping strength, and vertical pulling strength complete the upper body criteria. There's other stuff too, and of course, the range of motion of an exercise is influenced by leverages and other factors like the size of the implement. But overall, the squat, bench press, and deadlift are solid tests of strength, especially when compared to other strength sports that have a cardiovascular demand or require more stability. Let's not deceive ourselves. The idea that you can out-technique someone or that technique is what's limiting your strength is insane and only applies to a minority of lightweight powerlifters who attempt to bend the rules. This is not Olympic weightlifting. For the vast majority of you, if you're weak here, you're probably just weak, period. And that's the real reason why guys avoid these lifts. It's not that they feel threatened by powerlifters. It's that their lifts suck. And they try to hide it with exercises that have favorable leverages, like those lever machines, where you can easily load up 4 to 5 plates per side and are often short and biased, so they're even worse for hypertrophy. It all goes back to ego, which ironically is what these hypertrophy cells claim they've killed. They're similar offenders, but in reverse. It reminds me of the meme from years ago. No one cares how much you can leg press. Yet now we have online comparisons with other machines. Like on certain hack squats, guys are squatting 6 to 7 plates a side, worse with reverse bands, but can't even barbell squat 5 plates. What the f is that? Everyone is trying to avoid displaying their true strength in one way or another. Notice how if I start talking about strength standards on the Smith machine, guys can't say much anymore because you're lifting similar loads to your barbell lifts. Why don't the hypertrophy bros proudly display their performance there? Because they can't. Often, they're squatting 3 plates or benching 2 plates, which is the same as what they'd be doing on a barbell, making them intermediate lifters at best. Remember, if your goal is only hypertrophy, the Smith machine is best as it maintains the movement pattern benefits of barbell lifts with similar joint angles and strength curves, but with greater stability. Stability and progression potential is everything for hypertrophy. Even these guys will admit it. So if I'm making videos on barbell training and strength standards, you can apply everything I'm saying to the Smith machine. However, the masses don't want to hear it, even though it's accessible to anyone training in a commercial gym and is clearly the most feasible option for hypertrophy. There's no more stigma, so why is there this disconnect in recommendations or displaying? Why is it always some weird, novel exercise with obscure loading potential? Because they know they can't hang with the real elites. They know their numbers are off and they try to hide it, similar to what guys do with unconventional lifts. Back then, there was a simple question. If your posterior chain is so strong, why don't you just test your conventional or sumo deadlift? Why are you maxing out on behind the back block pulls, Jeffersons, and rack pulls at various heights? Can you just show one pull from the floor, even with those styles? Not that you have to compete in a meet, but if you're strong, putting up respectable numbers right off the bat shouldn't be a problem. After all, strength is strength, and I've proven that many times over the years, even when I was getting heavily criticized. I was always strong in all positions. No one could take that away from me. It was those who falsely applied my guidelines, mostly novices, who actually got wrecked. So many guys today resist doing this when it comes to free weights or the Smith machine and say, I'm not an ego lifter. I just don't care about your strength standards. Let me be. I'm a bodybuilder. Well, funny enough, many of them have no intentions of ever competing. I understand that. But guess what? It's deceptive. You know it'll expose your weaknesses and what you suck at, proving you're not as strong as your audience or peers believes you to be. And that's a real taste of humble pie. It will put you in your proper place in the hierarchy, probably as an intermediate lifter. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't get why guys mislabel themselves as advanced when they know they're not, or even think it's desirable to be in that state. Minus the status, it's not fun. When you're advanced, progress is painfully slow. You're doing everything in your power for minuscule gains. It's where most quit and start talking about their so-called natural limit. That too is cope, because they know their strength potential is higher, but they don't pursue it due to the effort in programming, learning, and training required. It's like getting your first 315 bench and feeling satisfied, yet you might have the potential for 3.5 plates. Just look at myself. I hit 405 in 2021, and I didn't plateau then, but I artificially stopped. I was still making gains, and have only built a bit more muscle since then. So what is my potential today after 2.5 years of mostly hypertrophy training? I would say it's probably 440, or at least reclaiming 405 at a lighter body weight, and that's what I'm going to work towards. With that said, I could have settled at 405. Most would, because it's objectively an elite natural accomplishment, often considered the pinnacle. But it might not be your pinnacle. That's the point I'm stressing. Settling is still settling, no matter how impressive it may be. If you know there's no plateau and you're aware there's still another mountain to climb, then why do you suddenly claim to no longer care about strength? I think you do care, and you're trying to find an excuse to say you're tapped out enough because you know it's going to take even more work. The same excuse that guys say for reaching their natural limit on hypertrophy is that which they use in a strength context. This excuse doesn't fly when you are still progressing at a workable rate. This is what we're seeing. Guys who built their physiques with big compound movements, who got really strong, and when the next level up is nightmare mode, now they're switching to cyborg technique or undergoing massive cuts that impact their leverages and overall strength. 9 out of 10 times, they get a lot weaker. The numbers drop considerably, and suddenly, they claim they don't care about strength anymore. They say they're past that, when it's been their identity for the last decade. The truth is, they're not past it. The moment they start gaining a little bit of weight back and the numbers naturally rise, they get all excited and post those lifts on Instagram. The infamous rebound hype. That's because they always cared. I do too. It's not fun when your 10 rep max becomes your 1 rep max. So don't you dare tell me you're mentally cool with that when it took so much to build up to it. You can't just snap that long-term journey away within a couple of months. That's a lie. An actual coping mechanism to deal with the loss. The only lifters who are genuinely content are those who were formerly obese. If you were a permabulker and had to cut down for health reasons like high blood pressure, heart disease, or cancer, or you were just a slob who had to change for yourself and your family to live a long, healthy life, then yes, you'll take the hit because it was objectively the best decision to make. But most of you are not in that situation. Most of you who come close to this are max 25% body fat and may cut down to 12 to 15%. The rare ones will get shredded and take an even greater hit, followed by weight regain because you can't handle being that weak. And then you have the balls to tell me it was just a phase. I actually never cared about strength. Yeah, it was a phase for all those grueling years of sacrifice, right? Come on. You don't make a realization like that after the first time you experience a performance drop-off. You can't fool me, because I've been in that boat before, and I jumped off, seeing that it's heading towards a whirlpool to Coplantis. The more you lie to yourself that you don't care at all about strength, the more unhappy you'll be. You're not going to tell me that after benching 315 and now you're down to 225, that you're cool with that. I don't believe that for a second. The defined arm or pecs are nice, but it'll be even nicer if your numbers were also in sync. You want to look like you can lift it, not leave others puzzled by how weak you are. The opposite issue, like I was talking about at the beginning of this video, we all want to bench more. After all, is it not the most common question asked in the gym? Oh, I wish I was benching less. I wish I was lifting lighter sooner, said no one ever. It sounds great on paper, but in reality, you don't want to be lifting novice loads unless you were previously injured or suffered from joint problems. It's like me saying, I wish I had longer arms for the bench press, because then it's like having a free camber bar and I can get more out of less weight. Logically, yes, that's preferred for building watermelon pecs, but let's be honest, I like my leverages because they give me an advantage for benching. It wouldn't be as fun to have long arms because I know that feeling in the opposite sense for deadlifts. That's what many tall guys deal with in reverse. And yet, we always hear them complaining about the bench press. So we know the wish of lifting less is a sneaky lie for those who don't have bad leverages. So I'm not built to deadlift, and many of you cannot lift my 600 pounds because my leverages force me to hinge deeper. I'm bent over like a Pendlay rope, which sucks from a demonstration standpoint in lower back recovery, but muscularly, our posterior chains are often comparable. So that's why the total counts, to round out your natural deficits, and your weight plays into this as well. That said, it's still flawed because it's primarily lower body base. You could have a guy benching 405 and squatting 700. To me, that's the biggest deal breaker about powerlifting. I can't tolerate that 2/3 of your total is lower body base and neglects so many elements of upper body strength, as discussed earlier. But when we apply a general strength training philosophy, which I've always been about, including a vertical push, vertical pull, and horizontal pull, and then having high standards on the best isolation lifts, like those done from the Bronze to Golden era, and you get strong at basic barbell and dumbbell exercises, like pressing and pulling the heaviest dumbbells in your gym from multiple angles, over pressing your body weight for reps, and doing the same with calisthenics for pull-ups and dips, it's all doable. So when you have a general strength mindset and focus on strength without being overly specific, guess what? You fulfill your natural potential. As far as I can tell, there's no natties who are both weak and big here. I've never seen it. The only exceptions, if you want to call them that, are those with amazing insertions and muscle belly fullness. But lean body mass wise, they get more out of less weight as a choice. If you made them peak or train with more specificity, you'd see rapid changes, which is exactly what we're seeing when bodybuilders get into powerlifting. They break records in no time. And even with powerlifters, this has been studied. If you place them into a DEXA scan, all things being equal with weight classes and leverages, the guy with more muscle is likely going to win. Hypertrophy matters and will limit your long-term strength potential. At some point, you have no choice but to focus on it. But it also goes the other way. You can't disconnect size from strength. It's applicable within reason. And for average guys, the advice to level up your numbers is not bad advice, provided you're not being a minimalist with your exercise selection. If you follow a maximized approach, like I've been advocating, and adopt a conjugate thought process where you never allow weaknesses to develop, you'll get as jacked as your genetics allow. Also, exercise rotation is essential to reduce injuries, even if you found the best exercises for you. So the only unnecessary methods in this context are the max effort method and the dynamic effort method, which you don't need for hypertrophy. And you wouldn't ever need to go below 5 reps. I can respect that decision. But guess what? You still have to get significantly stronger. And low reps at the bottom of the hypertrophy rep range typically feature heavier loads. It is what it is, unless you're shredded to the bone. Like during my recent bulk, I was doing 185 for reps with a super slow tempo and pauses on the AD press. Eventually, you get used to hypertrophy specific techniques, and you'll never be able to hide your strength. More out of less weight is supposed to be a small reduction by max 20%, not more, which is what I'm seeing now. Guys who are cyborging it with shit numbers, and even worse, with low reps, meaning their base was even lower than expected. That's not how this combination works. If you're benching one plate, you're never gonna get big. You just won't. Even 30 reps might not cut it. You need higher standards. And you might not like it, but in my opinion, 275 to 315 for one rep is baseline if the bench press will be a long-term staple for you. And it can be achieved in less than 5 years of lifting if you know what you're doing. Just think about it. 70% of 315 is 3 sets of 10 with 2 plates. And the rep work is what builds your strength. So if you're doing 3 sets of 5 with 225 after 2 years of lifting, what's adding 5 reps more in a similar time frame? When you really break down the numbers, it shouldn't take that long. Hearing this should be encouraging, a huge relief, because it's 100% realistic and simplifies the process and objective. Please stop listening to weak, black-pilled influencers who nocebo your strength potential. And by the way, anecdotally, when I don't focus on strength, my physique stays the same because progressive overload, whether it's the cause of hypertrophy or simply a side effect, must occur. And after all these years, I've yet to be able to separate the two. I just can't do it. So as a natural bodybuilder, getting stronger, dinosaur style, is my roadmap. So if you're lifting the same weights year after year, there's a high chance you'll look the same. The idea that you're progressing by improving your technique ever so slightly is not the proper metric. What matters is that your reps are increasing with the same good enough technique, provided your tempo is controlled. It can be fast and slow at the same time. Although you could argue that if you're going too slow, this reduction in absolute load will reduce the overall stimulation, but it's all context dependent. In my opinion, and this is what many advanced lifters forget when speaking to their audience, getting more out of less weight matters when you actually need it. If you're benching 3 plates for reps on a regular basis, it's probably not a bad idea to use a camber bar and slow down the negative, and maybe pause for 1 to 2 seconds longer. It doesn't have to be excessive. You don't need to do super slow like some high-intensity training advocates recommend. But doing something like Larson pressing or other modifications to reduce the load is valid when you're already strong. But you need to earn that right. Stimulus to fatigue only matters when you're experiencing excessive fatigue, when the risk to reward ratio of an exercise is no longer favorable. For some lifts, like the conventional deadlift, that fatigue might come sooner. Many of you will tap out within your first 2 to 5 years of lifting, so you may want to switch to a different hip hinge sooner rather than later. Personally, I would have dropped it after a year of lifting due to my lousy leverages, but for many of you, 2 years is not unrealistic. It makes sense because you can always lift heavy every session and your body feels the absolute load. However, many of you early in this iron game are wrongly obsessing about this. For now, you should be trying to get more out of more weight. This is what everyone misses nowadays because they don't come to terms with their real experience level. They fail to recognize that the natties with the most impressive physiques are all brutally strong and mostly lift lighter as a means of improving the stimulus fatigue ratio. Otherwise, we probably would have continued. Recovery limited us, not gains. In the beginning, this wasn't even in consideration. And that's exactly where a lot of you are now. So don't think for a second we'd be just as big without this base strength, especially for the muscles that were sufficiently developed through the compound movements. And imagine if we never neglected our weaknesses early on, we'd be even bigger, having our cake and eating it too. Again, you might point to bodybuilders who lift X weight that's apparently not heavy, but what you don't realize is that usually the reps are very high and have many reps in reserve, while not resting long between sets. So they could easily lift more if they lifted like you. It's always the same pattern, and oftentimes it's because they're afraid of getting injured since enhanced lifters are at a higher risk, but they're not weak. Let's make that very clear. If you're incline pressing the 80s with full range of motion, slow tempo for reps of 15 to 20 at 2 to 3 RIR, like shit, you can max out the dumbbell rack if you wanted to. I learned that when I trained with Dr. Mike. So again, don't be fooled by what you're seeing at first glance. It could be harder to standardize performance, but it's still up there. And very rarely did guys begin with this approach. They were already strong. It's annoying how influencers forget about their roots and claim that strength doesn't matter, or that they no longer care about it in the slightest. It's gotten out of hand, where hypertrophy is literally the only focus, taking the soul out of lifting. If all you care about is hypertrophy at the expense of everything else, you'll only use the most stable machines that take all the right biomechanical factors, greatly limiting your exercise selection and programming methods. That wouldn't fly with my passion for lifting and workout ADHD. It's exactly like the powerlifter who's imprisoned by specificity. If your gym membership ever gets canceled, your performance on many free weight classics and bodyweight exercises will suffer. You will have no skill at all. You won't be able to hang with a guy like me. But guess what? I can hang with you because my strength carries over to everything. Anything that I can lift on a barbell, I could do on the Smith machine any day without training for it. And I can max out your pressing machines on day one. The same goes for weighted chins affecting pull downs more than the other way around. The calisthenics world noted this 10 years ago. Anyone remember Profit Workout? He literally showed up to a random gym and maxed out all the machines, and the back work was freaky. Similarly, I've been doing the same with pull downs. I'm already at the bottom of the stack. But how, Alex? Well, not to brag, but have you seen what I do on weighted pull-ups? 4 plates with every grip at any body weight, 8 one-arm pull-ups, 4 one-arm chin-ups, 95-pound chin-ups for 15 reps. I can go on. So if my standard is a 300-pound pull-up for 5 reps, then surely, if the stack maxes out at 300 pounds, it should quickly be possible, right? Yet, I'll see these experts talking trash about pull-ups, doing pull-downs with only around their body weight or a bit more. Say 185 or 200, which is respectable, good job, but I and other pull-up specialists will do that for higher reps with Cyborg technique while weighing significantly less because it feels like a bodyweight pull-up. We have that closed chain advantage. So a regular technique, a bells of steel gym pin should be in their gym bag considering all they do is machine back exercises, which renders their arguments against pull-ups even more laughable. Again, it's weaklings trying to lead the crowd. And those who paid their dues can see right through their nonsense. So if I'm doing 270 to 300 pound lat pull downs at only 165 body weight, why are you doing a fraction of that than claiming pull-ups are overrated or too unstable when you don't even know what the instability feels like? As expected, it's hypothetical nonsense and you exposed yourself. Same thing with the iliac pull down work sets. I learned in just a few workouts that you needed to weigh down the bench. Yet I never see these guys doing that, which again proves how weak they are. So your strength and size should absolutely correlate, whether it's free weighted or with machines. But the free weights magnify honesty for most exercises. Your biggest muscles will usually be your strongest muscles, unless you're a genetic freak, which most of you aren't. So if you don't care about strength, you won't even be able to exploit calisthenics or gymnastic rings. You'll be so limited by stability and technique that you will become a hypertrophy cell with no athletic ability. The moment you get outside the comfort of your specialized equipment and exercises, you'll have a lot of learning to do. But that doesn't apply the other way around. That's my point. In the end, we get just as big because natties can only get so big. We're just going to be much stronger in the process. So if you can equally get both, why choose the option that only trains one variable but ignores the rest? If you genuinely care so little about strength that you would actually take that approach, then I got nothing more to say. Even natural hypertrophy finds that excessive. Even he, who's been vocal about not caring about strength, still bench 335 and does heavy curls that I've yet to match. So look at his background. It doesn't matter we were both bamboozled by powerlifting dogma. That's out of our system. And he still does a lot of free weight movements to this day, training both at home and at the gym. That's an important clue. When you're slightly hybridized, you have a lot more options. And that's how all the old school greats train by default. Now, you don't need to be like me. I take it to a higher level because I enjoy being the jack of all trades. But you can at least embrace some aspects of general performance. Like I don't care much about Olympic weightlifting or explosive stuff. I haven't even dabbled with sprints and power jumps. It's a totally different world and most lifters can relate. But do I care about absolute strength in addition to maximizing my size potential? 100%. And I'm happiest when my numbers are in sync with my size. When I got shredded, I was so weak, except for certain bodyweight movements, which is natural. Even though I looked my best, it was depressing to bench weights that I did years ago. You look better and you get non-stop compliments, but it doesn't feel right. You're a shell of your former self. There's a sacrificial disconnect. Unless you're totally satisfied on every level and maintain that physique for life, the moment you start gaining a little bit of weight back and your numbers climb in proportion, it's exhilarating. You miss lifting those heavy loads. You miss having more plates on the bar. The rebound is never meaningless, even if short-lived. So what does that tell us? So these average guys see you at the peak of your aesthetics and think, oh, I don't need to lift heavy. But they don't realize that you lost so much strength on the way down. Even then, it's probably still more than what they could do. Just to say, at the end of my shred, I benched 3 plates at 7% body fat. If 315 were my 1 rep max in bear mode, imagine how weak I'd be at single digit. My rep work would be like 185, making me nowhere near as impressive. So do you see how it all begins with having high strength, whether you lose a lot of it on the way down or not? Because if you do lose it due to an inevitable cut or deciding you don't care about maximum strength or being the biggest guy, you'll end up with poor numbers using normal technique. Even if you cyborg it to compensate, your numbers will be so low that you likely won't be big. None of your clothes will fit right, and you'll realize you didn't have as much muscle as you thought. The strong guys don't experience that to the same extent. So it is a valid predictor of size, even for bodybuilders, especially the competitive ones who are not in the off season. Those who say it doesn't matter are truly misguided. If you're passionate about lifting, you'll embrace the correlated aspects of it. And again, I've never seen an elite natural who was weak as a kitten. Expecting that is what's actually unrealistic, not the advice to get stronger on the right movements. Plus, chasing PRs is fun. Enjoy your training and let the passion consume you. Otherwise, you won't last in this game. You'll be burnt out with boring training and having nothing objectively great to shoot for. Numbers don't lie. They keep you in check and are the most valuable data we have next to muscular measurements to know that what you're doing is working. Stop looking at hyper-specific powerlifting training to strawman what progressive overload really is. Adding plus ones is natural bodybuilding. It's one and the same.